Hello and welcome to the DMPL Podcast. I'm Aaron Gernes, your host, and today we're continuing our AViD Author Podcast series. Ryan Stradal is joining us here on the podcast. His newest book, Saturday Night at the Lakeside Supper Club, came out in April this month here, and he's joining us next week, Monday, May 1st, 7 p.m. at the Central Library for AViD. Jay, how are you doing today?
Oh, pretty good. Can't complain.
That's right. You know, you're in the middle of your book tour. This book's been very well received. In fact, I'll show you the cover quick. Roxane Gay called it, quote, a perfect book. I saw that. It's got to feel great to get that kind of review from Roxane Gay.
I can't believe it. I'm still with myself. Yeah.
So
anyone would call it a perfect book, but also someone, who commands her respect, someone with her integrity and insight and wisdom. I'm really beside myself. Well, I kind of met her early on in my writing career when she was an editor at Pank, and I would submit short stories to her, and she always rejected them. But I'd give you the nicest rejection notes. To the point, one time Pank was holding a fundraising drive, and I donated money and got a shirt. And it really takes a hell of an editor to routinely reject a person and nonetheless inspire them to give you money. Those are some top level rejection letters that she sent me, and I always value them. I think about that all the time, just the time she took to say, you know what, this isn't for us, but X, Y, and Z, keep writing, that kind of stuff.
That's awesome.
I've been a fan of hers for a long time. Yeah,
that's awesome.
It means a lot to me.
So you've been out, I think the book's been out as we're recording this about less than a week, I guess?
4 days.
4 days, yeah. We're recording this on the 21st of April. So what's it been like so far? How's the reception been? I know you've been on tour for a little bit on the West Coast before you come to the Midwest. So how have you been doing with this?
Oh, it's been a lot of fun. I've only been in California so far. I've done 4 events here in what is now my home state, but I'm getting a lot of what is a supper club questions. And I'm looking forward to returning to the Northern Midwest, where that won't be part of the
That's right.
Won't be part of the program every night. Yeah. Let's go right in. Yeah.
So I want to talk to you about your books, obviously, in just a second here, but I got to ask, you live out in LA County now.
Yeah.
What do you miss most about the Midwest, and what do you miss other than weather? What do you miss least about the Midwest?
I miss the people the most. I miss seasons. I actually,
Yeah.
It would be cool if winter was shorter and summer was longer. But hey, don't we all want that?
Yeah.
I miss the terrain, just the natural beauty. It's such a gorgeous state, but I really miss the people most of all. What do I miss the least? Oh boy. I was going to say mosquitoes, but now we have those here too. The last couple of years, the mosquitoes have just come out of nowhere to haunt Southern California, and they're terrible.
Well, it's been raining so much there.
Right. Yeah, that's why. Yeah, it's one of the few, I've always thought that's one of the few cultural advantages of a Southern California summer versus a Minnesota summer. I would actually be that kind of snowbird or whatever. That'd be like, I'm leaving LA County between May and September every year and going to Minnesota instead. If we're gonna have mosquitoes here, I'm out. Yeah.
Find
that
was cabin by a lake.
Only reason I liked, the only reason to somehow prefer Southern California summer, which is drier and hotter. I miss humidity actually. Yeah, I'll put that.
You say that until you experience it again.
Right, until it's, but yeah, I miss it having not suffered through it, for a long time, or just in stops and starts. But compared to the dry heat, oh boy, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I grew up with humidity, and so I think it's nostalgia more than reason.
All right, this is your third novel. In addition to being set in the Midwest, I think food and drink, the hospitality industry, really play huge roles in your books. They're almost secondary characters. Obviously, your first book, Great Kitchens of the Midwest, and your second book, The Lager Queen of Minnesota. Kitchens of the Great Midwest was your first book, not Great Kitchens of the Midwest. But
that sounds like a fun coffee table book, though.
Yeah, look out for that
it's a
one.
Really lovely countertop. Yeah.
So, what is your experience with the hospitality industry? It seems like you have some sort of familiarity with it that you continue to write about it with such love.
Yeah, I'm more of an enthusiastic end user, I have to admit. I mean, I've worked in catering out here uh, as an adult, but as a teenager, my only restaurant experience as an employee was working at a supper club called the Steamboat Inn in Prescott, Wisconsin, which is the town right across the border from Hastings, where I was born. Well, I'm sorry, where I was raised, not where I was born, but where I spent like ages 5 through 18. And yeah, that was my one restaurant experience as an employee, and it was an impression. It was it obviously cast a pretty big impression on me if I based a whole book around it. Yeah, but I'd grown up just absolutely loving supper clubs and the milieu and the food, and they were the nicest restaurants in the area. They were, as one of my characters put it, where you spent the most significant nights of your lives. And there's such a pleasure to be at as a customer. And I thought, well, working there would be just as much fun. And well, to be honest, no, it was, the kind of drudgery one would have at any restaurant when you're a janitor doing the kind of work an entry level person with no experience is doing, like taking those big rubber mats off the kitchen floor out back and hosing them off, and vacuuming between shifts, and yeah, cleaning up tables, bussing tables, that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, it's pretty unglamorous, but at least I got to do it at the Steamboat Inn and not at Perkins or, Applebee's or something. I got to do it at the Steamboat Inn, which is, yeah. And so I always wanted to write about that milieu, having, been a fan of it more than an employee, but just also because they're so unmistakably Midwestern. There are very few things quite like supper clubs anywhere else in the country or the world.
The supper club that you worked at, did you have a familiar cast of characters that always came in on certain nights, or ordered the same thing every time they came in?
Oh wow, I'm sure I didn't have a good vantage point to that from my job duties. I was like cleaning up after them, maybe. Oh yeah, that one guy always like, you know, puts the pits from his olives in the same place or something. Yeah, but yeah, I'm sure, they all do, because they're community hubs and third spaces, not just restaurants. They're places that welcome regulars and local regulars, especially at the bar, where I didn't go near that often unless to clean up a mess. So yeah, I wasn't hanging out at the bar as a teenager and soaking it in as much as I would have liked, but interviewing supper club owners and former supper club owners and managers, I got a pretty good sense of what that milieu is like and who those people were. And frankly, I've known a few over the year. I've known a few over the years, and that practice of setting up the drinks of specific stools for specific customers to come in, sit at those individual stools, and have their drinks ready as soon as the door opened, was a story that more than one supper club manager told me was a common practice at their bar. So I just love that. I love that the community is so supportive of these places, that still so many are going strong, because frankly, they're not the cheapest meal in town, and that's a real factor when you have a family. So to make that decision, hey, I'm going to spend a few extra bucks and keep this local place going, even if it's only a couple times a year for special occasions, to make that choice that, hey, I'm going to support this local restaurant that's family owned, that's owned by a local family, and employs local people. I'm going to do that. And that, I try to do that in all walks of life whenever possible, especially with bookstores. But when there are restaurants as unique to a region as supper clubs are, it's also super important.
Yeah, I asked that question because I think your books, this book and your previous books as well, they just feel so fully lived in. The world that you're able to build within these novels in a short amount of space, really. I mean, it feels like, I was just thinking about it. It's almost like another great Midwestern show, Parks and Rec, where you're able to build these characters, and you're doing it within a novel space, which is a lot harder to do than within a space of obviously a television series or a book series of itself. So I just think that it's just wonderful, and it just makes me feel like everything feels so familiar and so well lived in. So I just wanted to compliment you on that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And one thing about that familiarity that I think that you've gotten quite a bit of recognition for is that you write about women and you straddle this line between being familiar, because you are writing a very kind of like colloquial, friendly upper Midwestern book where anyone that lives in Minnesota and Iowa and Wisconsin kind of can feel familiar to these characters, but also doing it in a way that's not stereotypical. Because as a white man, that could be something that, it's got to be a challenge to kind of like think about that and like make sure that you're not doing something that would cause, I don't know, it's stereotypes. You just don't want that to be your reputation. Obviously, you want to form fully developed characters. And I think you even go further sometimes, and you don't just bring women into a men's world, but you try to meet them in their world. For example, in the first chapter of Saturday Night at the Lakeside Supper Club, you actually talk about one of your main characters reflecting on a miscarriage that she just had. And I just like, how do you ensure that that fully finished product when you're writing about women is realized and true to their experience, or as true as you can make it as a male writer?
That's a great question. Mariel in particular, and a lot of my female characters are inspired by my mom. I feel I write for her, and I very actively put her in many of my characters. But that incident in particular was also inspired by life experience. My partner Brooke and I had great difficulty getting pregnant and had quite a fertility battle, and during which Brooke had several miscarriages. So I really wanted to do it justice. And so with that incident in particular, Brooke was a very active participant in the editing. I wrote that scene, and then I talked to her about it, and I said, let's talk this through, because I'm going to get asked about this. I want to, I had a front row seat for this event, but this is a lived experience for you. I want to talk about that experience, because we'd been trying to have a kid for a long time, and under those circumstances, when we weren't sure if we would ever have one, having a miscarriage was very devastating. I'm not saying that the average one is, or the one under typical circumstances and typical fertility isn't, but given our set of circumstances, it was especially just crushing. And I felt a need to write about that, but I also felt like, okay, I don't have the primary authority, and I experienced this emotionally, but not physically. And so I talked with Brooke about it. I talked with other people who shared a similar fertility struggle about their experiences with miscarriages, and I did my best to do it justice. Yeah. But these women helped out a lot in terms of reading these situations and saying, okay, I'd put it like this, or I'd use this phrase instead of that phrase, and doing a little bit of troubleshooting with, women who had shared that experience with Mariel. But man, as I gotta say, as a partner though, it was living through that series of tragedies in our life was something I won't soon forget. And I felt, I want to talk about this, and I want to do it justice, and I want to try to, do my best to represent this event that I very rarely see male writers write about.
Yeah.
Both miscarriages and the general topic of infertility. It's something that haunted us each. So I felt, I felt so isolated and alone during that process, that maybe by writing about this would make people feel less alone.
And you do, in the acknowledgments, you do dedicate part of this book to your son. I just wanted to bring, as we talk about this, I wanted to say there was a happy ending here to the story. So I think that's a really powerful story. I know that I think it probably helps people feel seen. I know as a male myself, it helped, I think, bring that topic to the forefront, especially putting it right at the beginning of the book, and making people reflect on it. So I thought that was very powerful, and you did a good job with it, from my point of view as well. So move into just a little bit of a lighter topic here. Your books do make me think about a lot of profound things, so there might be a couple more questions that are a little heavy here.
No
But
problem. No problem. I try to do both. I mean, life is both heavy and hilarious, and I
yeah,
try to put both things in my book as best I can. Especially when you're talking about a multi-generational family story like this is, like 100 years in the life of a family in a restaurant. There's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be losses and love and laughter. You name it, like whatever's on a refrigerator magnet or on a greeting card is going to be in this book, and like both the tragedy, both the sorry for your loss and the congratulations are all going to be in this book, and just as they are in life. And I feel like the humor for me is one of the most important aspects.
mm-hmm.
I love picking up a book and laughing, and I feel as a writer, when I sit down to write something funny, it's not going to work unless I'm laughing. Like, I want to laugh while I'm writing. I don't want to just sit there and go, oh, that was funny, someone will laugh at that. I want to sit there and challenge myself to think of something that makes me laugh out loud, and then the scene's done. And so at the very least, I find it funny. I'll put it that way. Yeah.
Well,
and
that's
maybe
good.
people who share my weird sense of humor will too. Yeah.
Obviously, your editor or agents have found it funny over the years enough to that they picked him up and keep
oh,
up
yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Your books are set in Minnesota, but many of the experiences, kind of like I was talking about earlier, are reminiscent of things across the upper Midwest. So I'm just curious, have you ever considered setting a novel somewhere else, maybe like along the Great Lakes in Michigan or in the Driftless area in Iowa here, or even, I mean, I was going to say it might be sacrilege to say Wisconsin as a Minnesota native, but you just said you worked at a supper club in Wisconsin. And honestly,
I did.
As someone that grew up right on the river, this book has a lot of Wisconsin. It makes sense because this book has a lot of Wisconsin spirituality to it, I feel like, as much as my northern Minnesota spirituality.
Yeah, I think I'm going to get a lot of flack from Wisconsinites when I'm there next week about not setting in Wisconsin. A book about a supper club and it's not set in Wisconsin, that's sacrilege, because Wisconsin clearly,
especially with the brandy old fashions.
Oh yeah, clearly the dominant supper club state, and then there's no question about it. But they exist in Minnesota too, and I'm from Minnesota, and I felt a little more right to set it in Minnesota, even though I worked in one in Wisconsin. I could have hung my hat on that and said, well, I do have employment experience at a Wisconsin supper club. But ultimately, I'm a Minnesotan. I'm, wearing the Twins cap, and that's what I know better. Yeah, it's possible I could set books in other parts of the Midwest. I'd be interested in exploring some wine regions, especially emerging wine regions, which have been happening in recent decades. That might be a topic in an upcoming book, and that would inevitably lead me to different parts of the Midwest than I've historically written about. So yeah, that it all depends on what the topic and the theme are. I don't think I would think of a location and then try to come up with a theme or a setting within that. Like, I'll let the subject matter drive me to the location, and then I'll just obey it. But I'd say it's quite likely my next book will explore aspects of the Midwest I haven't done yet.
Nice. One other thing I think that hits a familiar note with people in the Midwest, especially those that grew up in rural areas, is the ways that you write about family and business. In the Lager Queen of Minnesota, a farm is inherited, and that leads to a massive rift in a family. And I think that's something people are familiar with in certain parts of the Midwest. I personally am, actually. And then in Saturday night at the Lakeside Supper Club, you examine the way a family business, both large and small. There's this big Geordie's, which almost kind of reads as like a Perkins kind of.
Exactly. Glad you mentioned Perkins. I love that. Yeah, that's.
I think anyone that was reading it was like, I know what this is.
The rotating pie tower is the giveaway. Yeah.
Exactly. And then also the supper club itself is a small business. And you examine these ways that these family businesses, both large and small, shape someone's destiny, shape what they see as possible for themselves and what might limit themselves. I know family businesses aren't necessarily Midwestern in nature, but do you think there's something about the Midwestern dynamic that lends itself to these kind of struggles within family businesses, or is that something you see in California as well? I'm just curious about writing about family businesses within the Midwest.
Oh, I'm sure they exist everywhere, similar dynamics, but I'm more acquainted with how they exist in the northern Midwest. And yeah, I'm really interested in it because even a place that's appealing to me as a supper club may have heirs that are less enthusiastic about spending the rest of their adult life in one, operating one, owning one. And certainly when I interviewed current and former supper club owners, they reflected that. They said, well, not all my children wanted to work in this place, let alone inherit it. Luckily some did. I interviewed two children of who inherited the Dorf House in Roxbury, Wisconsin. Like, from a much larger family. I forget how many total children there were, but two of them like took on the mantle of inheriting it and running it to this day. And so I don't know if that was a pitched battle or if that was like, well, no, we're the only two that actually want to do this. I don't remember. I interviewed them a while ago, so I don't remember the specifics, but I know there's a story there.
Yeah.
And as there is at every family business that has heirs or what's the word? Like a a a plan to keep it in the family somehow.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's children, it could be a cousin, it could be a niece or nephew. There's this. It feels like a variation on the TV show Succession at times. And I don't want to say lower stakes because these stakes are plenty high for the people involved, and plenty high for the community, because when a supper club goes out of business, like, oh man, there's the place that was going to celebrate our 30th wedding anniversary, or our daughter's high school graduation, or it's where we used to go after softball games. It's an important, unique part of a community, and often a place where there aren't a lot of other choices, where the choice might be the supper club or an A&W stand or a Dairy Queen or a McDonald's, or a Subway. It's like, well, that's not a choice really. Like people might now have to drive 30 or 40 miles farther to go to a comparable place for that kind of night out. So it's quite a service they have when they're kept alive within a community. And one of the reasons I wrote this book was to hopefully inspire people who live near one to go to it and go to it more often. Keep going. Yeah.
Sounds like you had some fun talking to supper club owners and
Yeah.
children of supper club owners, and researching about supper clubs. Do you have any fun stories from those times as you were getting ready to write this book?
Oh, they're not nearly as fun as they should have been, because I wrote this book during the pandemic, and
That makes
all the interviews were via phone and email. So yeah, I really wish I could have gone to some of these places in person and had the full meal and gotten the full treatment that I described. But I just had to resort to my imagination when it came to the fun stuff. I did manage to hit a couple supper clubs early on writing this book. And then again at the very end when I was just finishing it up. But during the bulk of it, the middle 3 years there were just spent, in isolation in Southern California with an infant, and trying to
a lot of things on your mind.
exactly, and returning to this restaurant in my head every day and never stepping into an actual one.
So what is your writing process like?
Oh wow, now it's ad hoc and provisional. It's like, is my son asleep yet? Okay, and I think I can write now. Yeah, it's kind of that. Yeah, it's a lot. I've become a lot less precious about my routines. There was a wonderful interview with poet and writer Clint Smith on NPR a couple weeks ago where he said the same thing, and I felt so seen. I was like, yes, it's great to hear another father talk about how he used to have these writing preferences and routines that have now gone completely out the window, that he's a father. And he also had a battle with fertility himself too, and so I identified with that too. It was a really beautiful interview with Clint. But yeah, as a writer now, it's like when I can, but that also makes the writing a little more focused.
Mm-hmm.
When I was either a single guy or at the very least a child, a father without children. I'm sorry, a father without children. A person without children, a man, a childless man. I was a lot more slack sometimes. I tab over to see how the twins are doing. You know, get up, go out to eat, come back. Dork around on the internet for a while. Okay, now I'll get back to writing. And now it's like, okay, he's done for his nap. I got an hour and a half. Go. Nothing else gets done but writing.
One other thing I think plays an ever-present role in your books is death. And obviously your books tend to be these generational sagas. Saturday Night at the Lakeside Supper Club, I think, takes place over the course of almost 100 years, if not, yeah. But so death isn't really drawn out in your books, though. It's something that kind of happens. It's not really even a climactic moment, I would say. It's something that the characters have to keep living with.
Yeah.
Why do you write about death in that way, I guess? Do you have an idea or how that comes to you?
Oh, absolutely. I'm still working through the grieving process of my own mom's death. And I feel like each book is a different step in that grief. And to the extent that grief has steps, I feel it's still like it's a fog or it's a forest with no trails, as I described it in one book. It's not an experience that has a beginning, a middle, and end in any sort of logical way. And so these books are me processing my mom's death. And this book, essentially at its core, is about letting go of loss. The people in this book experience a lot of death, and the kind of death that really, will stick with them for the rest of their lives, but nonetheless, a death that also affects their relationships, their bonds with their family, their bonds with each other. And, I think I needed to read a story about people who could, not move past it, not forget it, but let go of it. And let go of whatever negative aspects accompanied this loss that are preventing them from developing or building or repairing relationships. That's what I needed to read. And so that's why I wrote this book. Yeah.
So as we wrap up, just want to ask you a couple of questions I like asking all authors.
Oh, of course.
When you get a when you get a chance to read, I know you're right. You're in the middle of your tour right now, and you're raising an infant, and I'm sure life is hectic. And but when you get a chance to read, I'm sure you do make some time for that. What are you reading these days?
Right now, I'm reading The Overstory by Richard Powers, and it's wonderful. I'm late to that book. It came out a while ago, but finally reading that. I just finished reading They're All Gonna Love You by Meg Howry. That book came out last November. It's wonderful. Meg doesn't have an MFA or even a college degree. She was a professional ballet dancer until her mid-30s and wrote this wonderful book set in the world of ballet in New York City in the 80s, and it's just pitch perfect. There's not a hair out of place in that book. That was just wonderful. And there was a book by a Canadian author I just finished, Ali Bryan, called The Crow Valley Karaoke Championships. And that book was really funny. A lot bawdier than my books. Like my grandmother, who hated my first book, Kitchens of Great Midwest, because of the language. Wouldn't like this book. This book is quite a bit, very R-rated humor, but a very similar sensibility.
I can tell by the title almost.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, she lives and works in central Canada. And a lot of the people are people you'd, not so far off from people in the northern Midwest or the plains, like similar personality types, similar ways of handling a crisis. And yeah, I enjoyed that book. It was very funny. It was what I needed to read at the time. Like it really took, a heavy experience I've been through in terms of, this weather-related housing crisis, and made me smile for a few days. Yeah, so I recommend that book too.
I just thought about this as we were talking about being a Midwest writer. It just hit me that a lot of book publishers are based out of New York, and you're out on the coast now. When you first were pitching Kitchens, people struggled to get it? Was there, or did you find people that were like, hey, this is, I understand what's happening here? Like, I just wonder, it's such a different cultural thing that I could see people maybe struggling to understand what you're going for.
Well, I'll tell you, I was shocked. I felt like, oh, there wasn't a book like it on the shelves, which is one of the reasons I sat down to write it. It was like, I really want to read a novel about Midwestern food. There isn't one yet. I better write it. And
Very niche thing.
Right. And then I thought for a moment, wait a second, maybe there's a really good reason there isn't a book about Midwestern food, you know? Yeah, like there's a market for a book about Midwestern food. So I started to really doubt myself about halfway through it. But I thought, you know what? I started writing this book. I'm going to finish it. I love this book. It's important to me. I'm communicating with my mom through this book. I got to finish it either way. And I was shocked when I got an agent, and shocked further still when I found a publisher, you know, who was enthusiastic about putting it into the world. I thought, boy, wow, you know. But I'll tell you this, I do interviews and events on the coasts, and my milkshake brings the Midwesterners to the yard. That's a fun thing, to go to Boston or San Francisco and have an audience where, you know, I'll ask, hey, how many people here know what a supper club is? And like a third of the audience raises their hand, and I go, all right, awesome. So yeah, so when my books come out, all the Midwesterners come out too, and I meet them like wherever they are in the world. Yeah, the native Minnesotans and Iowans and Wisconsinites and Illinois natives. Like I see you. Yeah, and thanks for supporting me wherever in the world you and I are. Yeah.
So when you come to Des Moines on May 1st here next week, what are you going to be talking about?
Oh, I suppose most of the same things we've talked about today, but I'm happy to take any new questions anyone has, talk about anything they like. I feel like it's such an honor to come out and meet readers, and I want to hear their impressions, and I want to hear also more about what they'd like to see in a book.
Yeah. I did mention, I just realized the last question I wanted to ask too, so I guess I'm going to flip my questions here, but I was curious, was Kitchens of the Great Midwest your first novel, or are you one of the writers that have had one that you just wrote that you left in a drawer somewhere and said that will never see the light of day?
I've got the drawer novel that will never see the light of day as well. Yeah, which preceded Kitchens. I wrote it about 10 years before Kitchens, and it was a necessary exercise in me developing good work habits, but I got nothing else from it, I'd say. Oh, I spun off one chapter and published it as a short story, but that was it.
Awesome. Well, that's a good note for writers out there everywhere. That you
can, exactly. I won't revisit that novel and attempt to publish it. I promise you, but I did salvage some parts and find homes for them.
Yeah, it's okay to write one that you think, but as long as it's an exercise to build on.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. No day spent writing is wasted, I'll tell you that. Yeah, I mean, I also write first drafts that are like 550 or 600 pages for books that end up being 300 to 320 pages. So I throw a novel's worth of work away in the process of writing one. And so, yeah, that's my credo, is no day of writing is wasted. It always gets you to something better. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jay, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Again, J. Ryan Stradal will be at the Central Library Monday, May 1st, 7 p.m. That event will also be live streamed on Zoom. We'll have more information about that online at the day of the event, and you can find out more at dmpl.org/avid. Jay, thanks so much for being with us today. Then we can't wait to see you in Des Moines on May 1st.
That's going to be awesome. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to it as always.